to day 5 of the Divershefy Club launch, an international speaker series. My name is Sylvia Smetana, and I'm the co-founder of Divershefy, and your host today and for several more sessions to come. So before we get into more details, I actually would like to find out who our participants today are, and we have a short poll that we can do right now. And I ask you to please respond. What is your professional background? We're going to take a few seconds for this until we get about 70 to 80% of the participants. Okay, I think we have a good number of participants who have voted. So I think we can end the poll for now. And the result is we have 20% investors, 20% board members, 20% female startup founders, 30% senior women leaders, 10% other senior leaders, and 30% others. So thank you for sharing that information. In a couple of minutes, I will hand over to the moderator of the day, which is Aditi Balbir, to introduce the speakers. But before I do that, just in case you have not attended the launch of the Divershefy Club on October 1st, let me catch you up and give you a short introduction to what we do. Divershefy brings women into boardrooms and C-suites. The Divershefy Club is a new global network of women who are in boardrooms and C-suites who support other women to get there, with the help of board members, investors, and corporate leaders. The video recording of the launch event has been shared with all the registered participants. If you do not see the mail, then please check your spam folder, it might be there. You can also find out more about Divershefy by visiting www.divershefy.club. So we have a full week of events with international speakers for you as part of the launch of the Divershefy Club to highlight the issues that Divershefy is addressing. The overall topic of the launch series is Women Leaders Changing the World. The topic for today is Gender Smart Investing, the role of investors to bring about gender equality. We will have 1 hour for the panel discussion, followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. Please put your questions into the Q&A section during the discussion, and we will answer as many questions as possible after the panel. The session will be recorded and be made available to all registered participants until October 12th. Thereafter, the recording will be available only to members of the Divershefy Club. And if you want to sign up, you can visit www.divershefy.club. Back to today's session, let me introduce your moderator for today. Aditi Balbir is a founder of V Resorts and an angel investor. Before starting her venture, she worked in private equity, and now after successfully exiting her startup, she's looking to support and mentor other women entrepreneurs. So thank you, Aditi, for taking on the moderation for today's panel, and I'm handing over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia. We have a very interesting topic, and I'm really wanting to learn more about gender smart investing. The way I've read about it is that, we're taking into account gender-based, principles into our investing strategy to not only drive equality, but also drive economic returns, which seems very, very interesting, right? Today we have with us two amazing people, Srikanth Sundarajan, who is the GP of Venture East, and also a mentor and advisor to early stage startups. Venture East, as it happens, is one of the oldest venture capital funds in India, with over $325 million in assets in funding, as well as about 100+ odd companies, mostly in the tech background. We also have Komal Sahu, who is the Chief of Sustainable Finance at AVPN. This is a comprehensive funders network and has over 500 members across the world. She is passionate about impact investing, venture, as well as sustainability. Welcome both of you to the panel today. So
Thank you.
Srikanth, thank you. I'll begin with you. You know, even before we get into gender smart, what it means, if you could take us through the world of investing. So what are the different investors that are out there? What is the different type of funding that is available? And what are the type of companies that get funded?
Good question, Komal. Good question, Aditi. Sorry. Just wanted to actually kind of start off from our investment thesis and then kind of broaden it to other investors. What we look for is essentially passionate founders, a good founding team, a reasonably big market. I'm not saying a huge market, but reasonably big market, and some sustained traction. So these are three very important ingredients, and we actually go through and make sure we do our homework right. Quite often we may not get it right because none of the investors do, because it just depends on a factor called luck and a whole bunch of extraneous circumstances. But this is basically the core thesis that we actually follow, and I've actually had a few successes. Also, we've had our mixed luck when it comes to investments. But by and large, you're right. I mean, investing close to about 400 million over about 20 years, we've learned a lot, especially in the context of India, US kind of investment corridor. So I'm happy to take on follow-on questions. But like those three ingredients are very important: a passionate founding team, a reasonably large market which has a potential to go global, and if you look at traction, we need to see some amount of traction. I'm not saying a huge amount of traction, but like there has to be some momentum from our perspective.
So you're talking about what are the sort of stages that you invest in? Are you talking about early stage?
So we are early stage comparatively. We are pre-Series A and Series A. Okay. We are certainly not Series B, Series C, because for that you need much larger funds and much larger quantums. And there are fantastic venture funds in India. I mean, remember, the Indian VC scenario is fairly nascent when you compare it to the US, which is about 50, 60 years old. India is only about 15 years old, and people are getting impatient, right? So you have, despite that, India has done well from a VC perspective. We have about 15 to 20 unicorns. I mean, everyone's aware of that. And we need more and more people to participate. And the nice thing is you have some fantastic names here, like Axel and Sequoia and Nexus and Bessemer, Matrix Partners, Lightspeed. All these guys are phenomenal, and they're actually helping the ecosystem quite a bit. Of course, large hedge funds too, like Tiger and a few others.
So in fact, I'd say that we're pretty evolved that way, because we have investors coming in right from the angel stage all the way to Series C, D, private equity, and so on. So in fact, I think pretty much all the stages of a company's journey are covered by investors, right?
I think so. I think where the big gap still exists is basically the angel situation, because angels pretend to be large investors and expect returns very quickly. And that is a big issue, because if you look at like Israel and you look at like Europe and you look at the US, that ecosystem is a lot more friendlier towards early stage startups. So a bunch of us who've actually done companies exited, because like my previous avatar was also, I've been an entrepreneur 3 times around. I've been a prof, I've been an exec in software companies. So understand essentially kind of a holistic picture. That has to improve quite a bit, because academia needs to work with industry, needs to work with early stage investors, and more. And this is changing. It's changed quite a bit since 2008, at least in my understanding. And today we have very smart angel investors also staying the course, because they have to stay the course at least for 4 or 5 years. That's why they've invested in.
Perfect. I hope if the audience has any questions on investing, maybe we can take it after this session. But let's get right down to gender smart investing. And this is a topic which I've just recently started understanding. So, Komal, over to you to explain to us what is gender smart investing. And in fact, I had heard more about gender lens investing. So, if you could explain the differences between the two terms.
Actually, I would say, Aditi, both terms are used interchangeably. People don't necessarily make a distinction between gender smart and gender lens. Gender lens is a lens that they speak about when they're investing. But I think gender smart tends to be more inclusive than even gender lens, because I feel that, especially in a Western context where, when we talk about gender, we talk about the LGBTQI community as well, right? So when you think about gender smart, you're thinking about the entire inclusiveness of that gender as well. And also when you think about, it's often used in a corporate context. And also what I would say for gender smart is, again, you think about, when you think about improving the lives of women and girls, you also talk about making sure that the men and the boys are also included in that equation, such that their roles are shaped and defined to be supportive of women. So whether you're looking for male mentorship in a corporate environment, that's where gender smart has a role to play. But we can dig deeper into what exactly is gender lens. I belong to the impact investment community, and we have a number of funds that are looking at investing with a gender lens. And because they're focused on impact, there's an entity called the Global Impact Investing Network. It has a definition of how it regards gender lens investing. So I know you want to delve further into that. I can define that criteria for you. Would you prefer that?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So basically, when they talk about gender lens investing, they're talking about the investing component and also about the process of investing. So when you talk about investing component, you're investing in women-led or owned enterprises. You're talking about enterprises, investing in enterprises that are looking at workplace equity. They're looking at how you focus on boardroom representation, how women are across the entire, the entire business of the company, whether it's in the supply chains, whether it's in the, whether it's offering products and services that are specifically for women. So that's where it's, and also the process with which you invest. So you focus on gender from the very early stage of investing all the way to the post-deal monitoring. You look at a strategy with respect to that whole investee company. It has metrics that it's capturing with respect to gender as to how many women are employed, how many customers, how many beneficiaries are women. So basically, the vision is to address gender issues within the investee, the portfolio company as well. The whole culture, the organization is focused on making sure that it's an inclusive environment. So yeah, there's a lot more that goes into when you talk about gender lens investing.
Okay. But the way I've understood it also is that there is a separate component where there are women or there are gender focused people who make investment in women. And when they do that, they have a better lens to understand, their counterparts and to understand the companies that they're investing in, also have the ability to support them in a better way. So is that correct?
So gender lens investing does not necessarily mean that the fund manager is female, but what I mean, the more, in fact, I was just listening to a panel with the impact investment community in India, and they were talking about, IFC was speaking there, and they were talking about a 20% better outcome in their portfolio companies when the fund manager is actually it's a diverse community of fund managers. So I guess when you put diversity, whether it's at the fund manager level or you look at it from from an investee, exactly, you get a better outcome, and that's been proven again and again. In fact, I think there was a report that talks about being able to add to global GDP by about 25% if you made it more inclusive to have women in the workforce.
Absolutely, absolutely. Srikanth, what about you? You are making investments every day. Is there a gender lens that you use? Do you believe in this concept? And if so, why?
So absolutely, I think the inclusive nature of any leader and team is very important. And I'll kind of not like to distinguish between gender lens and gender smart, because at the basic level, what you're looking for is someone who espouses this kind of quality that everyone is equal and everyone is smart, right? So, and that's very important to us, because we don't want any kind of non-inclusive behavior, which is actually detrimental to any company in today's environment. Secondly, it's actually very stupid, because if you look at it, I mean, just because someone is a man, someone is a woman, doesn't mean that they're not equally blessed in terms of a brain, in terms of capabilities, right? So why would anyone kind of do that, right? I mean, yes, maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, there were kind of examples of that, but I don't think it persists today. So the way I look at stuff is, again, I just go back to basics, whether it's a woman-led company or women-led company, or a combined team which is diverse, I mean, including all kinds of races, etc., which again is a bad word in my name. There shouldn't be anything called race. There shouldn't be anything called gender divide. You have a great team. You back the team and let that actually work for you. I mean, that's basically our philosophy, and we've done that. Now, if you look at how life was 20 years ago in India, perhaps it was a little bit more archaic, a little bit more kind of old-fashioned or bad fashioned with bad values. Things have started to improve quite a bit. I mean, we have a number of women entrepreneurs. I can actually name them, who are really smart people who actually stayed the course. Naya Sagi is one, okay, and then there's like Veena Ashya, who comes to mind. There are at least like some 15, 20 very, very smart individuals who are running their own company. And that doesn't mean it's all women. That doesn't mean it's all men. All I'm saying is they're actually solving a very important problem. And they're actually addressing the key thing. How do you build a company for value with scale, with quality? So that's basically very important to me. So if there's any kind of bias any other way, then that would probably not fit our criteria, at least.
So I think somewhere I agree with you and not agree with you a little bit, because I do know, and I've heard this over my journey as an entrepreneur, that when you approach an investor, for him or her, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. And I have honestly never faced bias in the Indian ecosystem. I've also been around for 10 years. So I agree with that completely. And I think people do take that view that there will be no bias. But at the same time, what I feel is that when we talk about gender smart investing, it's not, see, there is a disparity, and we know that there is a disparity in the women entrepreneurs versus the men, right? So it's actually not about the level playing field at all. It is actually about giving them, a little bit of a push, or giving them, focusing on or choosing companies which are women led, or which solve a problem for, the women community at large. So do you agree with that? And I'd like both your views on that, Komal as well as Srikanth.
So Aditi, I do agree with that. I mean, if your fundamental premise, as Komal was pointing out, is gender lens, which is I will look for women-led entrepreneurial businesses, then, and that's your thesis of investment, I totally agree. We are basically very neutral, and we are not biased anyway, right? So I was coming at it from that standpoint. I'll defer to Komal, because she's actually done a little bit more impact and gender lens-based investing. So she may actually be more qualified to answer this.
I think that the issue is that, if there wasn't a, firstly, there's a subconscious bias which, an unconscious bias, I would say, that when male funders are looking at businesses, they tend to be, as I said, it's not consciously done, they tend to support male businesses, male-led businesses. Also, in many cases, women, when they're pitching their businesses, are not in quite the same, they don't get access to the same resources, they don't enter the same communities, they're not, and I've experienced this personally as well. You don't get treated in the same, it's not a level playing field. And and that's all the way up and down the chain. When you look at women, the education of women in Asia is rising, but you don't have necessarily economic empowerment. So if you didn't have a gender lens in how you invest, you couldn't necessarily ensure that gender equality is achieved. And the fact that you need to achieve this gender equality, it needs to be done in a holistic, in a systematic way that, that makes sure that women make their way all the way up the chain. The next thing I would say is that there's generally a low number of women in the labor force, and they are even in the more mature economies, and I'm talking across Asia, not just in India. You see very few women entering the labor force, and by a certain age they also exit the labor force, simply because it's part of it is the fact that they take time off to have children, or in many cases they're ousted because it's considered that this is a male domain and not a female domain. So again, there's a lot of biases that we have to counteract. And this is at all types of businesses, all stages of businesses. And if you don't take a positive view and you don't take a positive bias towards it, how do you counteract the disadvantage that women experience and are faced with? So that's part of the reason why we have a number of funds that are now starting to look at this and look at how this could possibly be a gender alpha that could be created. And these are established fund managers that are recognizing that there is an alpha that could be created by just looking at that diversity component of it. As I've said already, we have statistics that point to the fact that bringing women into the workforce, looking at women-led businesses, could have positive outcomes for an economy. So why not do that? For example, we have Unitas, which is based in Bangalore, which is an Indian entity. It's launching a gender lens fund. We have, and they're looking to raise about $100 million, and they're going to go at Series B kind of stage. You have Bamboo Finance, for example, that's looking to launch $1 billion fund, very much with a gender lens, because they recognize, firstly, there is a bias, and secondly, if they address that bias, they actually create a better outcome for themselves, a better alpha for themselves. So I think that there is opportunity there as well.
So let me actually add a few things to what Komal said. So 2-3 things that I got from her kind of comments were, number one, there are funds that are being launched by several companies with this kind of focus, which is great. I won't talk about alphas because that's like something else. Okay. I think it's result oriented.
It's contradicts, right? You think of alpha and you think of male. You don't think of female alpha.
That's exactly where I'm leaving it, because if you study a lot of animal hierarchies, like the elephants and the wolves and the storks and things like that, the female has a very important part to play. Okay, so just leave that aside for now. They're also called alpha and alpha females in that context. Mm-hmm. But I'll take you back to a couple of interesting anecdotes. I was actually in very senior management at HCL. And HCL is a services company. Everyone's probably aware of it, global. And one of the things which I was very curious about HCL compared to some of the other competitors like Wipro and Infosys was they would always choose small offices in large cities. Okay, and I couldn't understand that initially. I'd say, like, why do you open up so many offices? And then, like, bingo, the answer was right in front of me, because it made the situation a whole lot friendlier for women entering the workforce. They were very close to home. They could go home and And that was immensely valuable piece of input, because people could work part-time, they could come in anytime. In those days, it was like not, the infrastructure was not so great from a work from home environment, etc. But like it was phenomenal. And then when I was chief operating officer at Persistent, we kind of followed the same policy. We had at one stage 30% of our workforce were women, because we actually opened up a lot of city offices so that they had access. They could come in safely, go back safely, feel comfortable, and we had a lot of women in our leadership, right? So the point is, I think people are trying. I mean, I'm not saying everyone is biased, but certainly I think what Komal pointed out earlier, I mean, you have to have funds which has this kind of focus, which actually provides that impetus. Unfortunately, if you look at us, we don't have that kind of a mandate, but like we certainly want to support inclusive management styles. We want to support like essentially diversification in the workforce. I'm not just talking about men and women. I'm talking about people from all kinds of backgrounds, and that really helps. Actually, that is a sign of true leadership, and those are the companies that are going to go forward and survive. I mean, because you can't actually stick with the old style and assume things are going to be normal. So hopefully that amplifies Komal's vision, and maybe Aditi can ask us a few more questions.
So in fact, I wanted to know a little bit more about the case for Gender Smart. So is there any data? Are there any reports? I know that, having more women in the workforce increases, the GDP by 25 trillion, according to McKinsey. We have all those large figures that I understand. But what about the fact that fund managers perform better? Women in board, if there is a woman on the board, they perform better. There are a whole lot of statistics that say that if there is diversity on any team, be it the management team, the boardroom, or even the funding team itself, the returns are supersede, right? So do we have any such data for the Indian ecosystem, and has anybody studied it?
So I can answer from one basic standpoint. I think whenever there are women, if you look at like our public sector banks, right? And Sylvia can correct me, or Komal can correct me, or private and public sector banks. You have the HSBC chairman, you had the SBI chairman, you had Axis Bank chairman, you had ICICI. All of these large institutions were actually women-led, and there's a reason for it, because generally they understand the pains of whom do you offer loans to, how do you support your consumers, and how do you make a business easier. So if you look at all their boards, there is a fairly decent representation of women there, right? And so this fact is not lost. Of course, there was an act also introduced in 2012 or 2013, which mandated that like at least you have one or two independent women directors.
One independent. That's right. Yeah.
And so we had a change on every board, and I think they have contributed. So all these things add up, right? The other macro point, which is not to be lost. I mean, I can just go back to my history. I have a great mom, I have a great wife, I have a great daughter. I mean, and they've actually contributed a lot to my success. And if you look at like education, tech startups, if you look at like, I mean, a great example is Lijat. Lijat is a complete women-led cooperative society, which is probably one of the most successful societies ever. Of course, thanks to COVID and a little bit prolonged monsoons, they haven't actually done well this year. But like, man, I mean, the whole world knows Lijat Papar, right?
Otherwise, yeah.
So there are tremendous examples, of this happening. And there's tremendous friction too, please understand. I mean, the friction comes from antiquated government policies. Actually, women leaders who are ministers should take much more kind of a positive step forward. I think they seem to kind of take a positive step forward when they are in the opposition, but when they are in power, they don't do enough. Okay, I'm going to be very upfront there. I mean, this is something which needs to be driven home. And if you look at number of institutions, I think if you look at IITs, if you look at BITS Pilani, you're seeing a number of women professors joining and doing really well. If you look at just stats, okay, I'll tell you one stat. When I joined IIT in 1979, in my batch, there were 260 guys and 4 women, okay? I'm talking about just one campus. And we used to kind of joke, if you cite a woman in IIT, you've actually kind of done a lot better than citing a tiger, okay? Because they were so sparse, right? And if you look at that ratio, that's gone up to, I would say 13, 14%. And in IIT Tirupati, which is run by my batchmate, there are special reservations to kind of get that number higher, and they're doing fairly well. So I think one has to give it time. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And if you only look at stats, going back to your original question, Aditi, stats are quite misleading because people like to publish stats. So I have a theory on stats. It's statistics, and damn lies, right? Unless it shows up in terms of some good thing happening, you can't rely on it, because you've seen the COVID numbers, you've seen a whole bunch of stuff that is on GDP. I think the fact that like certain moves are happening and I can see it on the ground, I think other people can see it, is actually very, very heartening. So I think give it time.
Super. Komal, what about you?
I think I mean, I understand stats can be molded to answer any particular question. But I would still say they're the one, I mean, as an accountant, that's the one quantifiable metric that you can say, okay, there's at least a number behind it as opposed to nothing. And what I would say is, once you start investing in women, there is clearly multiple benefits for corporations. You know, they found, for example, women entrepreneurs are a way to open new markets. For example, when you have a women entrepreneur, she's also going to the underserved markets, particularly for women consumers. And you think about it, women often are the key decision makers in the household. So when you're looking at purchasing something, when you're looking at investing in education for the family, you're investing in healthcare for the family, often it's a woman who's part of that decision-making process for not just herself, but for the entire family. So, and therefore there's a kind of understanding of how you could improve the outcomes for each other. And I think from that perspective as well, putting funding behind women entrepreneurs will help open those new markets. I would also say, I can speak from an impact point of view, that they found that whenever, for example, they have female sales agents who were selling things like solar products, they had a better, powerful distribution network. They had growth in outcomes. They also have, for example, again, one of the other entities we have is Finca, for example, where they use banking. They're very much like a banking agent, a self-help group, and they look at giving funding towards other women. And they found within these self-help groups, much like a Grameen kind of model, that women banded together. They actually felt there was an honor attached with returning funds back into, and they supported each other in making sure that the loan payments were met and the funding could be received for them as a whole. So I think, again, there is a particular empathy component that women entrepreneurs bring with them as well. And I think also just diversity of supply chains, diversity of distribution networks that didn't previously exist. Again, an investment in a female-led business can give you access to that. So I think if you ignore the outcomes, and that all results in actual profitable outcomes. So as a funder, you cannot afford to ignore those economic returns. There's a common sense to them, as far as I can see.
So how do you think we're going to go about solving this problem for the Indian ecosystem? What's it going to take? Is it just a capital problem? Do you just see more funds coming into the purview with a gender lens? Is that what it's going to take to solve it?
I think there has to be accountability. there has to be transparency. I mean, you have, for example, a Goldman Sachs type of David Solomon pipe up and say, we're not going to do business with anyone who does not have women on their board. And I mean, for a blue chip organization, for a bulge bracket bank to turn around and make a statement like that means that there are others who will follow suit, who will think along those lines. So I think definitely there has to be accountability in what you're doing as a business, making sure that discrimination is taken out of the door, or people are held accountable if there is harassment, if there is discrimination. And we've seen some of that happening. I think this last decade just gone, it's catapulted it to with the Me Too movement to a different level. Then I think also there has to be activism amongst the shareholders as well as the investors. So again, that you have to say, okay, what I am not going to do X, Y, Z if I do not see. And I'll give you an example. We held an event recently, and all the speakers, and I was moderating the panel, but all the speakers were male. We had people come back and tell me, I don't see diversity here. I said, I haven't put my name down, but I'm actually moderating. But they said, no, we will not come to a session that has just male speakers. We want to see that diversity. So it's that kind, it changes thinking. It makes sure it changes behavior patterns. And then again, the regulators, the legislation, making sure the policy, making sure that there's, if you're going to be listed on a stock exchange, and if you don't have diversity on your board, perhaps you're not allowed to be, allowed to go through the listing process. So, and that has to be mandated at a stock exchange level, to say that if you don't have adequate number of people on your board, which is where you mentioned the India need to have a female board member, but it shouldn't be, I guess, opportunity for nepotism. It shouldn't be, oh, my daughter-in-law will sit on the board to give it the diversity. It shouldn't be, it still needs to be a meritocracy. It still needs to be someone who's qualified. Otherwise, it defeats the object of what we're trying to create over here.
Komal is making a very strong case for it, Srikanth. But, unfortunately in India, and because I've been an entrepreneur for so long, I don't see any funds, very few, very small funds, which are focusing on women. Outside India, it's been a great year for women entrepreneurs, because a lot of funds have come up. They've raised more money than they thought they are going to raise. So all that is happening, and it is catching momentum, just as Komal is saying. But why are there not more women entrepreneur focused funds in India? Is there not a case for it?
So I think there's a case for it. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't a case for it, but if you look at the percentage today of women entrepreneurs who've got funded in India, it's sub 5%. I mean, I'm talking about
absolutely
funding at
2019.
Scale.
Yeah,
I'm talking about funding at scale. I'm not talking about like angel money, which actually be a little bit higher. And I think this is you have to let things unwind, right? Because India has been kind of a weird culture. I mean, let me tell you, in India, people even do not understand what VC investing in and what angel investing is. And I'm talking about the government of India. If someone can levy taxes on funds raised, then they just don't get it. Okay. And you're talking about, so we have to actually go at it a step at a time, right? And if I look at the number of entrepreneurs, I'm talking about women included, because when I mentor, I don't use any kind of differentiation. All of them get hammered by GST, people harassing them before they have 1 rupee of revenue coming in, right? Or $1.
True.
So I think India has ways to go. I mean, forget about like startups or funds. Right now, they have to actually go fix situations in larger companies, public companies. And going back to my earlier point, it's good that the act was introduced in 2012. But going back to Komal's point, it should not be used or misused, where you just put your cousin or whatever to come in and be a rubber stamp, right? Because if you want to really follow the course, get someone who's qualified, who can actually drive it. Like Infosys got a couple of really strong people on their board, and they're still there driving things. I mean, Kiran Majumdar Shaw is like a phenomenal beacon when it comes to women entrepreneurs in India.
Absolutely.
I mean, so is Revati Ashok, a whole bunch of people who really actually are driving things forward. But the consistency is not there, right? Like, how will say SEBI kind of come up with a guideline saying that if your board is this way, you will actually go for funding, right? Again, what will happen is it will get tampered, and there will be some relative who will be placed on the board to go forward. And if people are actually, I've heard horror stories where the people have been invited to boards where they've been completely ignored, which is actually pretty stupid, because at the end of the day, it is another person. It is a person who's actually had a distinguished career. It is a person with the same gray matter between their ears, as far as I'm concerned. So respect. I think that respect factor is missing completely in India. So unless it's solved, and the government also solves it in a fundamental way where you are making it very friendly, right? People are going to be reticent to kind of float new funds, because they want the first set of funds to actually be espoused in a particular way, right? For example, we don't want angel tax. We don't want our entrepreneurs to be harassed. Get past those problems before we start looking at some other stuff, right? Otherwise, you are stumbling right out of your starting blocks. I mean, I know a lot of venture capital funds, especially international ones who have arms in India, who are very frustrated. You might have the IVCA, you might have a whole bunch of spokespeople, you might have NASCOM, you might have iSpirit. All of it comes to naught because there is this passive aggressive attitude by the government where they'll say yes, 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 we will do it, but like when it comes to actually enacting it, they are not there. And when it comes to reinforcing it in terms of kind of saying, okay, is the board member being appointed correctly? Does she have any issues? We will actually monitor it to make sure that like it is being done correctly. There isn't anything, right? So in my opinion, the way we offset it, I'm just being very pragmatic here, is basically we look at the passion. I mean, sometimes a situation is such, a business idea is such, and the traction is such that like the leader, whether it's a man or a woman, gets it a lot more. And one thing for sure I can kind of give it to you in writing is a woman leader is a lot more has a lot more EQ. I can give it to you 100% in writing in terms of the entire workforce and the customer. So if she can actually get to the next level, she will actually build a very, very successful business. Now, can I make that a prime focus in my VC fund? Unfortunately, no. Can others with that kind of lens come in? The answer is yes. But the first problem has to be solved, which is the government itself, right? And its policy and its enactment, which there's a huge lacuna, in my opinion.
So in fact,
I think
another issue, sorry, please, you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing these gender focused funds raising capital even during a pandemic right
Lockdown,
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think there, specifically the impact type of focus funds, which is where our members sit, they are funded by institutional investors in many cases, and many cases development finance institutions. They have their own SDG 5 metrics to meet, which is the social development goals that the UN has put forward, which a lot of them have, including pension funds that have a fiduciary obligation, and they've made meeting SDG metrics part of their fiduciary obligations. So when you go up the chain of a fund to the actual investors who sit behind them, and the fact that gender investing appeals to them, they're ticking certain boxes themselves. And there's also intersectionality where you've got gender and climate issues, you've got gender and poverty, you've got gender and education, you've got all of those, and you're ticking those boxes as well. So for those limited partners, there's actually interest to invest in funds that are tackling such XYZ gender issues. So I think there's an appetite there. It's just making sure that when you're actually raising your funds, You go out to that investor pool and say, now this is part of my mandate as a fund, that I'm going to now go out and put money because my investors, my LPs are prepared to support me through this process. And that has to come all the way up the value chain. And I'm sure that's the case even within India, where you're tapping on Indian family offices, or to say, look, this is, I understand you're trying to resolve XYZ issues, and these businesses can only be built if we focus on gender as well. So I think that issue needs to definitely be part of the equation as well.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the way that I see it, there are exactly these three problems. So Srikanth spoke about the policy problem, which is very real. But you have spoken about the capital problem, which people are really they're really believing in it. This year, even during the pandemic, if I was, for me to raise money on the gamut of a woman founder, a woman entrepreneur, has been much easier than for my own journey, to be very honest. So it's actually been quite phenomenal. That change is happening. But there is actually a third thing also, which I believe in, which is that, for the women focused funds, the funnel also has to be there. That has to be strong. And that funnel, interestingly, is not as large as the normal funnel is, because if you look at, the colleges and places where entrepreneurship is sort of drilled into you, for example, the IITs, if you look at an IIT which has 100 people, there'd probably be 5 who are girls, right? None of those 5 girls are thinking about entrepreneurship. Their focus is, oh, we want a job after this. Whereas all the 95 boys are only thinking about entrepreneurship. They've already started their companies while they're at IIT, right? So it is also a question of change of that behavior and of that, of that mindset, which I think also is happening. Lots of networks are working on it. There are the UN Foundation, the Girl Up movement, all those are really great that in every college. And I see that, women do show up when you talk about entrepreneurship. So I think that's changing. But yeah, all three components together, I think, are important, and that's what's going to be the change. I wanted to ask you, Komal, there is a concept called gender washing, where companies just use this as a box ticking exercise. So could you just explain a little bit about that, and how do you, shy away from that? How do you guard yourself against it?
Again, I mean, I gave you a perfect example of that, is where, you say my wife is going to join the board, or my daughter is joining the board, so that, the face of it, there's clearly, the diversity that you want at board level not there. Similarly, if you say, oh, we're educating girls, or we're providing positions for women, and that's not really happening, there's a window dressing exercise going on, then, so again, that accountability and transparency, needs to be in the entire process, from the minute you source the deal to monitoring it post investment, making sure that there are metrics being captured, where, for example, you're focused on beneficiaries of a business being women. Are you actually following it through to the field to see that actually the beneficiaries are women? Are you auditing that process to make sure that that gender washing is not happening? It's not window dressing.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add to that, to Komal's point. I think I mentioned it earlier. If you just mandate that there has to be a woman on board, and don't have policies to mandate, to monitor it and follow up and make sure that, like, the person is actually independently appointed and is actually contributing, then there is a tendency, at least in India, for it to be misused. Okay. And I would say 80% of the companies do misuse it. And I'm going to be very, very vocal about it. Unless the founders, the ethos of the company is totally committed to that, it's not going to happen. Now, Aditi, I'll go back to your changing world kind of example. Today at IIT Madras, we all elected Shubha Kumar Nateshan as the president of the IIT Madras Alumni Association. She's a very successful entrepreneur in a field which is very male dominated, which is precision engineering, hardcore. Oh. And I have invited her to join the club. Hopefully, Sylvia will be able to bring her on board, and she will actually be able to kind of recount some wonderful stories. And similarly, I'm going to invite Arti Gill as well as Anu Acharya. They're all phenomenally well known, at least in the India context, and have actually kind of spent enough time with them through the years to understand their frustrations. But I think more and more people actually coming on board actually really helps. And I think give it time is all I'm saying. I mean, everyone wants things to happen very quickly. It's not going to happen that quickly because India is amazingly resilient to change. In that's always good and it's always bad. So I think you have to give it time.
So, I think, let's talk about some of the successful examples that have happened in the gender smart investing space. Do we have any great examples, any great geographies that have executed this well? Singapore, maybe.
This is aimed at Komal first, then I'll answer.
I think, I think it's still early for globally. I don't think it's. I mean, you're hearing women joining boards and women as CEOs in the US. Obviously, it's a more developed market, and accordingly, the outcomes are that much more developed. But I would say, again, it's not necessarily in more economically developed I guess, geographies, there is definitely a greater amount of inclusion, but it's not still not at the point that it needs to be. There is still opportunity to improve it, and I guess when it's like the suffragette movement, you're just it's a building block, right? You even the Me Too movement has been a building block, and we've seen with we've seen incubators and accelerators that are starting to focus on just women entrepreneurs, women for women support, and there've been some vocal people like Sheryl Sandberg, Marissa Mayer, who've come into the place and who are actually talking about these issues. Bene Brown. I mean, they're bringing the idea that women cannot be, should not be excluded, and they have a lot to give back. And when you look at boards, you want to make sure that there isn't a group think on the boards as well. So I think that understanding of what a board should constitute as well is an important component of making sure that actually women, when they enter the board, they're also looking to make sure that women, they have their successors in there as well. So they themselves are mentoring other women to come up the value chain as well, to subsequently be able to replace them at some stage. So that's, I think we also have that burden on our shoulders when women join boards, that they should be making sure that there's a succession plan for them, which includes other women. So I think nobody's quite there yet. To answer your question, nobody's quite there yet. And there's still quite a lot of hurdles to climb. But we can only ask and we can only push for it. And we can only take an activist stance. And if we do so, as I said, much like our grandmothers did, we can get outcomes. We can get change.
Perfect. Srikanth, what about you?
Well, I think she summarized it well. I think the most important thing is you have to give it time and you have to keep on chipping away, and call it activist movement or call it my grandmom's movement, because she was like very keen that all her daughters actually went to college because she was denied that opportunity. Very, very smart person. So I think it's taken a little bit of time for it to happen. So hopefully we will get there.
Super. I do think so as well. I think, as Komal said, people are pretty vocal in India now. There are enough networks, there are accelerators, incubators. In fact, again, there's a whole value chain that is supporting women entrepreneurs. There's capital coming in. So I think I in fact say this in all my sessions that, hopefully in 10 years, we will not have any session on gender smart or any session on women entrepreneurs. It's going to be entrepreneurs and that's it. And every entrepreneur's journey is different, so of course, women, have a different journey than that. So I just thank you so much. I think we can take questions from the audience, and let me just go into the Q&A section. Okay. So the first question says, isn't the problem isn't part of the problem that many investors say they are gender neutral, like Srikanth mentioned, since women lack the informal networks that can propel them forward and hence are already at a disadvantage? Don't investors need to consciously lean positively towards women-led businesses? I think we have
Okay.
answered that a bit. Please,
Yeah, I
please
can.
go ahead.
I can. I mean, let me answer that. I mean, the reason
Yeah.
why I say we are gender neutral is because we are looking for a good idea, smart entrepreneurs, irrespective of gender, right? Now, it's very difficult for us to actually kind of bend our investment policies because we are basically committed to our LPs, etc., to look for the best deals. If we were actually a fund which had a gender lens kind of focus, as Komal was pointing out, that makes it different because then we will actually go in and actually support the entrepreneur right from very, very early stages. And that's not what we do. And it's very important for people to understand that if we try to extend that arm, then we are not being true to the fund thesis and we are not being true to our LPs. Despite the fact that we have to kind of tick off certain things like diversification of the employment force and things like that. But today it's not the case. Like if I was a general lens focused company, then I'd be actually going around and helping women entrepreneurs to kind of connect up and come up. So unfortunately, that's not our focus. But like there are funds, as Komal pointed out, which have that focus. And like for example, there's a focused women-led fund in Bangalore, okay, which is doing fairly well. There is She Hub, which is basically the equivalent of T Hub in Hyderabad, which is only focused on women entrepreneurs. And if we work with them, if they are able to kind of get us entrepreneurs who've actually scaled up, we are very happy to look at it. But if we have to go and do that, that requires a complete change of mandate.
Change.
Yeah. And that we are not in a position to do today. I'm not saying we can't launch a fund that does that tomorrow, but I think it's better led by women, those kind of funds. This is my gut feel.
Oh, that's interesting that you say that. Komal, what do you think about that? Do you think that women-led funds are better suited for investing in women entrepreneurs?
Well, I think we should ask Vani Kola that, right? She runs
I
Kalari, and it's
honestly
one
do.
of
No, but
you
I
know.
honestly do agree with Srikanth on that, honestly, because why they are better at it is only because they understand the differences between the entrepreneurs. No one is better, no one is worse, but I always say that they are different and the sort of support that they need are different. Whereas in my case, exactly, as Srikanth said, I'm a first-time entrepreneur and I really didn't know what I was doing, honestly. And the sort of support I got sort of turned me or made me become the alpha female that he's talking about, because all I knew was to be like a man in the workspace. I had no idea how a woman navigates the space. I said, okay, I've got too large a workforce and I have to be like that alpha male. So these are the sort of nuances, or these are the sort of differences which I think women entrepreneurs, once they have gone through entrepreneurship, can bring to female founders. And Vani Kola is a good example because she has invested in a lot of great women founders, but she has chosen to keep her fund neutral as well. So it's
Yeah.
not a women
So,
focused
so
fund.
on
Yeah.
Vani, I'll answer a very interesting. There's an interesting anecdote because both of us were actually first-time entrepreneurs in the Valley, and we
Oh
used to
wow.
actually
Okay.
exchange a lot of notes those times. And she's the
Okay.
only uh, VC uh, kind of India fund that I actually follow on LinkedIn. By the way, I mean I don't follow too many. Okay, and there's a reason for that. Okay. Uh, but I think you're right. I mean, if you look at her portfolio, it's actually kind of quite diverse.
Yeah.
Though
Absolutely.
there are some really good women-led, like Zibame was one, which was I thought very, very appropriate. Unfortunately, it didn't work out the way it was supposed to.
But
But
there's
like I
your
think
story. There's Cash Karo. Your story is a good example. Shraddha has
yours,
done a good job.
but your story actually, if you look at Shraddha, she actually kind of personifies that I'm a man in a man's world, right?
Absolutely. She says that.
She's
And
she's
we all identify with that,
and I love hanging out with her. I mean, she's a great person
She's
to
a
hang
lot of
out
fun.
with. Yeah. So I think she's cracked that. I mean, and when I talk about Shubha, I talk about Anu Acharya, I talk about Naya Sagi, I talk about Arti, Gail, all these people have somehow, and Veena, Ashia, all these people have somehow navigated that. They figured that out. And that is a transition. I think hopefully, as you're saying, Aditi, maybe give it 4 or 5 years. Because at the end of the day, you're forgetting one very important thing, that anyone can be smart, okay? It is not because of gender. And anyone can be smart, it's not because of background. And we are solving for both those issues, right? When you talk about underserved markets, at least in the India context.
I think there's a bias here. We expect women to behave in a particular way. Educated women with a global exposure are as confident and as articulate as any man, and they can navigate that world in the same way, except for the prejudice that they may encounter. So I would say that, when you're mentioning a lot of these entrepreneurs, they're successful because they're authentic to who they are. They've been shaped and defined by the world that the education they've had, the exposure they've had, and they don't have to be feminine to be female entrepreneurs and to fall into that bucket of these are the female entrepreneurs we're supporting. They're just being their authentic selves, and we're going out and supporting them. I don't think they're being alpha male, or they're just being themselves. As I said, they're being authentic to themselves. So I don't think there's a mold for a female entrepreneur we should expect. These are competent women, and therefore they've been able to garner that support and garner that kind of funding.
So Komal, I'll kind of counter that. Is there a mold for a male entrepreneur?
There is not necessarily a mold for a male entrepreneur, but there is a expectation of the male entrepreneur being able to be confident, to be able to navigate that, which is not necessarily always true for the female, especially when they're starting out. They need a little bit of that hand-holding. They need a little bit of that mentorship. They need a little bit of door opening. Once that's done, once they've understood how the equation works, and that's where the accelerators and incubators have a very strong role to play. That's where the mentorship has a very strong role to play. Because
go ahead. To my point, exactly. That's why She Hubs and the fact that women-led VC funds, if they are reaching out, I think it makes a lot of difference, including you. I mean, if you are there, I think it makes a lot of difference because it gives them that confidence. But I think at the end of the day, I think all of us are looking for a leader in any kind of entrepreneurial journey, to be confident, to be bold, to basically take care of their enterprise and drive it forward to scale. And there are negative characteristics, be it male or female, which do show up. I think that's the way I look at it. I look at it, everything kind of neutrally. But I think that was a good question that was asked, saying that there's probably a little bit more friction in terms of an uphill task for women coming out. I think Aditi supported that. You're supporting that. I think we need a little bit more of these incubation facilities. Now, the downside of incubation facilities are there are too many of them. It's like basically a tomato plant, right, with a lot of fruits. So you don't know which one is actually doing well. I think there has to be some degree of quality there. And that's where I think I would request women leaders to actually come in and participate, which is actually very sparse today, very sparse, in my opinion.
Let's take more questions. The next question says, how does the investment environment differ in US and Europe? Is there more emphasis on gender smart investing? Are there specific funds that focus on women entrepreneurs? Will they invest around the world? Komal,
Again, I
do you want to take
to Komal.
Yeah, please.
So I think there's organizations such as LVest that have come up that look at I'm just trying to think of again, there are certain incubators and accelerators. And as I said, the kinds of funds we work with in Asia, such as Bamboo, such as Unitas, such as Patama is another one, CEF is another one. We also have funds that are being set up by DFIs, like the Australian government, which is looking at investing in women. It's called IIW. So those are, and they are, I mean, right now, a number of them are Southeast Asia focused, but Bamboo and Unitas is actually South Asia focused. And they are looking at investing with the gender lens. The US funds, I mean, there's some that are making, a lot of effort to be inclusive. And they're looking at opportunities. Perhaps they, again, as they're going about raising their funding, using a gender lens is actually helping them. I think Alex Ohanian, his fund has said we will look at gender investing. So Serena Williams, his wife, has actually set up a corpus of her funding towards supporting women-led businesses. Now, are they stretching beyond the US? I don't know, but there is clearly movement along that path. And of course, AVP and we've got a network, a gender network that has been supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we're actually bringing together female ultra high net worth women who are in turn pledging to causes. So we're creating that network for that particular reason so that they can then support causes, support entrepreneurship. And many women are. For example, we have an Indonesian-based family where the sign of the family is actually a female. And she's set up an incubator for Indonesia to help young entrepreneurs, and she's looking at supporting female entrepreneurs. And I think we need some of that in India. Why aren't female, why aren't the Kiran Majumdars of the world stepping up and saying, okay, we can give back, and this is a particular way to give back, and we can support female entrepreneurs coming up the value chain and becoming another Kiran Majumdar tomorrow, right?
Absolutely. And there are some funds like Goldman Sachs has a launch with GS, which is focused on Africa and India as well. So they look at all developing economies, but they have made just one investment, but it's a large fund. It's a $500 million fund. So there are some investments. Usually most guys in the US have their counterpart in India. They've already, set up something and set up an office in India. So usually you reach out to the guys in India and they're pretty much there. So that way, a lot of the funds are already there. And in India, there are these two funds which are focused on women. One is called She Capital, and the other one is AWE funds, AWE funds. They are actively looking at deals. They're in the early stage up to Series A. So these are some of the names. Srikanth, if you know any more. You mentioned somebody in Bangalore as well.
Yeah, Bangalore was basically She Capital. Okay.
She Capital, already, okay.
Yeah.
I've covered that. All right.
Yeah. I think the more important thing is whether it's Goldman Sachs or someone sitting in Alaska wanting to kind of do this in India. I think the biggest issue there is two things. One, which I pointed out, Komal actually reinforced, we need more successful women entrepreneurs in India playing a proactive role and actually setting up these incubators, which are a lot more focused, number one, not just lip service, not just say, okay, be a part of some MBA exercise in a school, which is what happens typically. I think there are 1,500 good schools for MBAs in India, and 1,000 of them have incubators. I don't know what they're doing. Okay. So that's a very important point. The second thing is actually when these people set up offices in India, these funds, they actually do very poor hiring. So if you want them to actually kind of do things in a focused manner, they actually hire the absolute wrong kind of people. Okay, and it's easy for people to keep on saying no, right? You won't lose your job. And so that's an important thing for these people to consider before they actually kind of write their mandate out. So I'm hoping these things change, and I think it'll change only as Komal was pointing out. She's building this network of high net worth women entrepreneurs. Let them actually come in with a focus. That's the only time it's going to change, because yeah.
We have a couple of more questions. What role does the investor play regarding having more women in boardrooms and C-suites besides supporting female founders?
Okay. So there isn't an explicit role that we can have on the board because we have only one seat. I'm just talking about it from my standpoint. We do support entrepreneurs, women or male, in terms of making sure that like they're doing the right thing. And if they're not doing the right thing, or we feel there's a gap, we do try to extend our help because as investors and as board members, we cannot run operations. That's one. Okay. Number two, we want to actually make sure that like everything is done in a prescriptive manner as far as corporate compliance is concerned. So if it requires diversity on the board and you need like independent women directors, we do mandate that and push for it. So those are the two things. In fact, like we also go as far as making sure that like there's diversification in the employee workplace, and we collect stats on that on a monthly basis to make sure that like that is indeed correct and we get it audited, right? But beyond a certain point, we can't be involved in day-to-day operations and what tends to happen. But we do make sure that there's a POSH committee set up. We do make sure that like we at least check that in terms of resolutions and what's happening so that it's not an eyewash. So those things we do, I mean, as an investor.
Komal, do you want to answer that, or should we just go ahead? We actually have a couple of more questions.
Yeah, let's go to the next question.
How is an investor's perspective towards women who may plan a pregnancy while staying at work and managing their companies?
Okay, can I answer that?
I can also answer that, by the way, but you go ahead.
Go ahead, Srikanth.
Please.
No, actually, we just, I mean, we were actually named as a very friendly VC company because Mansi Verma, who is our investment manager, actually surprisingly announced to us last August that she was going to have a baby, and we all celebrated and we said like spend some time at home, and we made sure that she was very, very comfortable and made sure that transition was there, and we still kind of make sure that like she takes time off. So I think from that perspective, if we espouse that within our own company, we try to kind of promulgate that to our investee companies also. So from that perspective, I think you can actually reach out to Mansi and find out how we did it. And I think we try to encourage that amongst all our investee companies and all our founders, okay? And there's no exception there.
I was going to say that, you know, an individual's work ethic is an individual's work ethic. A commitment to work is a commitment to work. And it doesn't matter whether you're female or male. You know, you can have men who are work shy just as you can have women who are work shy. If you have women who made a commitment, are responsible towards that commitment. I mean, hang on, it's coming up to midnight here. I'm still awake and attending to a panel. So it depends on the individual, right? So you make that decision based on the individual. You don't make the decision, you know, if you could have a man wanting to take time off for paternity, and you have to be supportive of that, right? And in many cases, those, you know, we're dealing with an environment where those roles could be reversed too, right? So I think you could have easily, and you know, COVID has clearly proved that there's nothing to stop you from being productive and working from home, right? We're all doing it. So and technologies enable that. So you know, so there is opportunity where, you know, due diligences are being done, right? I saw a recent report by Impact Alpha. In the last month, 1.8 billion was deployed into India, simply in startups and in without physical due diligence being done, right? So that's another learning, right? So it is possible to be in this environment and have women work from home and have the flexibility. It depends on the individual whether they have the work ethic or not, right?
Absolutely. No, and I completely agree. I don't think...
Very well said. Very well said. I think I reinforce all Komal's point.
Yeah, absolutely. I've not had a problem with that myself. In fact, I've had many more men take longer paternity breaks than the women themselves. And like you said, we have to be supportive. But no, if you're, if you belong to a venture funded startup, you don't face these sort of challenges or these problems or get any questions asked on, are you planning to have a baby and so on and so forth. I have heard of horror stories, but it hasn't happened to me. So let's go to the next question, which is, would there be more women in boardrooms if we had more female investors?
I'll take that. I think probably in the current situation, maybe it encourages that. Okay, I'll put it that way. But I think in the long run, it should not. Ideally, the investor should not matter. You should actually have adequate women representation on your board. And in fact, it should not be an issue at all. You should just have adequate representation from all segments. And going back to your point, Aditi, we hope the world changes, goes towards that. But today, having a woman entrepreneur always helps, at least get you past the initial kind of thought process.
But from a pure numbers perspective, if there is a fund manager who's a woman, usually she'll be on somebody's board. And so obviously,
Right.
anyway, the number of women on that board would increase. So just
Right.
from a normal logical, thing, obviously that would
So
happen.
that's I didn't want to bring up the obvious. That is
Yeah, so that would
basically
happen.
that
But
is
yeah, but whether
in Vedic astrology they say that sitting in a kendra or a trikon gives you uh, some special kind of privileges. That's what happens here because you're part of two sets, right? And you actually get that benefit. But I think by just being that, right, you start encouraging them to be a little bit more open, and I think that's
yeah,
important.
also I don't think women choose if they are not on the board themselves, they will don't exactly make the choice of whether there should be a woman on the board other than themselves. They actually again choose whoever is available and whoever is looking after that investment. So may or may not impact. What do you think, Komal?
I think it's so you have to draw a distinction between an appointed board and the executive leadership of a company, where people make their way to the board because they're in the C-suite of the company. So the CEO, the COO, and people of that ilk, the CTO in many cases, these join the board. So what you're looking for is amongst that executive leadership suite, you are seeing women coming up the chain and joining that executive, and with potential to perhaps being able to step into a CEO shoe if they need to, right? The CFO, CEO, whatever the role may be. So I think women investors will want to see there is we see that women investors want to see that the executive leadership, the leadership team also has women in there. And therefore they're supportive of that. And often hiring practices, you'll have, if you're going to take a board seat, you may be involved with the key recruitment of the executive board in many cases, or you may be the last person. It depends on what kind of board role you take as an investor. But in many cases, the key hires may still be put past you. And if you don't see women coming through through the job pool, through the resumes, you may question that and say, why can't we find women through? So you just bring a different lens to it. And I think that as a female investor, you will definitely ask, because again, once you have diversity, you can think differently in terms of strategy. There is no longer a group think. You're not all thinking along the same lines. You have somebody who thinks differently, and you want that on your board.
Perfect. Okay. What are your views about taking on women directors on boardrooms of funded startups? This is Priya, and I think she has a question for you, Komal.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Oh,
can you repeat?
What is your view on taking?
I'm losing you. Let me.
Taking on board. on to take on women directors on board.
Sorry, I'm just
rooms of
changing
funded
out headphones.
startups.
Give me a second.
Okay.
Sorry, there was a problem with the speakers.
Should I say that again now?
Please. Can Srikanth take it? Can
Srikanth, what are your views?
Oh, my views are, I think it's an evolution. If you look at it, it's a very, very good act that was passed by the government of India to have at least one independent women director on boards, and it has to be monitored. And if you actually do it correctly, like in the case of Infosys and a few other companies, I actually talked about the large banks which are public, you will actually see that the companies have done fairly well. So I think this has to be reinforced. And my views are positive as far as this move is concerned. It needs to be reinforced and should not be abused. Because in India, sometimes there's this tendency to kind of take it very easily, like as Komal was pointing out earlier, appoint a daughter or a cousin or whatever on the board. That should be avoided. And maybe there should be ways of doing that, saying that like a relative cannot be kind of appointed, and it has to be done through a proper process, and there has to be a proper onboardment process, as well as if there is a termination, you need to follow everything properly. I think that's the way to do it, and hopefully we will see a lot more of that happen. As far as I'm concerned, it's a good thing.
Just to add to what Srikanth, I didn't grab the entire question, but when a lot of the companies we work with, even the public companies, they have ESG in there, and the G is a big component of it. Governance is a big component of it, and within that governance, they want to make sure that there's diversity, and that diversity is not, again, in terms of gender, in terms of backgrounds, in terms of even age demographics. Sometimes when large listed company boards, they actually bring in a millennial just to bring a different kind of lens into the thinking process. And then you can't have a board that sits forever, right? You need to be able to roll off people from the board as well, because they get too complacent. There's, sort of locking of hands, and you want to make sure that governance component, and you create governance issues if you become too embedded. You also split the CEO and the chairman role in many instances, simply because you want to make sure that there is actual oversight on the board. So I think there's lots of ways you can make sure that women come into the pool to make sure that governance component is well met.
The last question was from Vanitha, who asked about the same thing that we just talked about, whether women fund managers also look at more women in the CXO positions. So I think we've already answered that, and we are close to our closing time. I think we have one last question. Just let me take a look. Pitching to fund managers requires certain skills. In your opinion, do women have these skills? If not, how do they imbibe them? Srikanth.
All right. As far as I'm concerned, I've always found women entrepreneurs to be much more articulate, and they actually do their homework a lot more, mainly because I think they've actually understood that it's not an even playing field. They've actually spent more time in actually grooming themselves, preparing themselves, getting feedback. So I find them a lot more on the ball in terms of what they are pitching, what they're wanting to do. And so I think that's a good sign. Now, do I see plenty of them? The answer is no. So that's a different problem. I'm not addressing that. I'm just addressing what you actually asked. So I don't see a difference. In fact, I see that they are much better prepared, and they are able to actually roll in different members of their team during that presentation in a nice way, as opposed to just male entrepreneurs just keep on yakking away, and no one else can actually get a word edgewise, including the investor at times.
What about you, Komal?
I think both at the entrepreneur and at the fund manager level, it is possible to get the right staff in. It's not that there aren't female fund managers. How do you acquire that skill? It's much like any other skill, I guess. There's experience that plays a big role. There's relevant qualifications. Whether you've gone out and got the relevant MBA or the CFA or whatever that you need to be able to. And then there's life experience, as I said, that the exposure, the life experience that will have a role to play as to whether you are suitable for as a fund manager. Same thing is applicable in the case of the entrepreneur. How passionate are you about the cause? How long will you stay committed and persistent to that cause? How compelling is the problem that you're trying to solve? How does it resonate with you as an individual? Those are all things that the fund manager's lens will bring in when they're reviewing the entrepreneur, and the fund manager themselves are being recruited with the relevant experience. So I think there's both there's women who meet the entrepreneur criteria, and there are women who meet the fund manager criteria. I don't think there's a dearth of it.
Absolutely. Thank you both. We're done with our questions, and we're also done with time. Just to recap for everyone, we've spoken about gender smart investing, and clearly there is a case for it. It's beyond morality. It's about the economic returns as well. Hopefully there will be some shift in the Indian ecosystem. We're looking at policy, we're looking at capital, and more capital coming in from the LP level right down to the fund level. And finally, also a little bit about the ecosystem and the behavioral change, wherein incubators, accelerators, networks, all those things become more important. Over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much to the panelists and to Aditi for moderating. I have one comment that I hope I can bring, and unfortunately no time for discussion on that, but State Street and BlackRock, both very large institutional investors, have mandated their companies to have women on board. So I do see there is a case that investors have an influence, at least the large ones. So it's just a point I wanted to bring in as well. So thank you very much. Tomorrow's topic will be gender balanced leadership and the role of HR. Our speakers will be Kiranmai Vendalia, Head of Human Resources at Western Digital, and Vanita Datla, Vice Chairperson and Managing Director of Elico Limited. The session will be started at the same time as it started today. We hope that this session has inspired you to join the Divershefy Club, and you can sign up as a member at www.divershefy.club. You can also find out more about Divershefy and our new approach to increasing the numbers of women in top leadership positions.
Thank you, Sylvia, for having us. Thank you, Aditi. Thank you, all attendees.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much. And we have a little more. We have actually a free masterclass that we are offering to everybody who's attending on emotional intelligence on October 20th. If you want to attend this masterclass, send an email to info@divershefy.com with the subject line masterclass and your LinkedIn profile and WhatsApp number, and we will send you the link. Okay, we can finish with this, and please join us tomorrow with gender balanced leadership and the role of HR. Good night in India, Asia. Good evening in Europe and Middle East and Africa, and have a nice day in the US.